You are listening to The Material Revolution, a podcast dedicated to building a better understanding of and relationship to textiles, fibers, and resources. I am your host, Catherine Susi, and I'm sitting down with artists, designers, educators, scientists, and creative thinkers from around the globe about their specialized knowledge and experience in working with fibers, processes, techniques, and technologies with the intention to create awareness, inspire knowledge, address responsible practices, encourage creativity, and to build a material community. So I welcome you to tune in and listen to those who are contributing towards change and a material revolution. Before we dive into today's interview and content, you can find us at www.thematerialrevolution.com. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Material Revolution. And to view some of our video interviews, hop on over to our YouTube channel. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Material Revolution. This week's conversation is unique because I got to speak with Sigi Ahl, Creative Director, and Abigail Erikson, Administrative and Project Manager at Eileen Fisher's Waste No More. Our conversation focuses on the use of technology that's traditionally used to produce industrial textiles, non-woven textiles, using a needle felting process. And the outcomes that come from this type of technology produces a form of felt. And for some of you that are familiar with the felting process, you will recognize that there are two ways of producing a felt cloth. One using water, using the wet felt method, and then there's the bonding process that's completely waterless. And this is the method that uses a mechanical implementation of barbed needles that fuses the fibers together to create a unified cloth. And in my conversation, Sigi shares when she was first introduced to the needle felting process and how this came to inform what she has innovated at Waste No More, using the garments and textiles that have been collected through the Eileen Fisher's Take Back program, which is a program that Sigi assisted in establishing back in 2009. And for our audience who perhaps isn't familiar with Waste No More, it is a new expression of Eileen Fisher, and it embodies the art and design of conscious consumption. Waste No More creates at the intersection of creativity, ecology, and architecture. As a collective, they are concerned with the beauty of the discarded and the potentiality of what can be done with repurposed or unusable materials. And it is through their innovative approach to combining tradition with the unconventional that they've been able to innovate a solution that will allow for discarded and unused or unsaleable textiles to have a completely new life by reimagining this industrial needle felting process. And it's through this technology that they've been able to cultivate an artisanal textile that has not only resulted in a environmental experience through what Sigi Ahl refers to as wallworks, but their experimentations and unique method for cultivating this textile has allowed for them to further develop and expand upon where they can apply this material. And it's because of the collaborative nature that is inherently embedded throughout the creative as well as physical process that's involved has enabled them to not only produce outcomes as a result of the collaborations and partnerships they've established to date, but it's clear in that in order to make the necessary change and sustainable solutions that we require around waste textiles in our environment, it involves community building. And it's because of what Waste No More is doing and has created to date through their meaningful forms of engagement that they've been able to shift the narrative of what is possible. And as I've mentioned in other interviews and conversations that I've had on this podcast, the practice of textiles has been a community building exercise since the beginning of humanity. And there's this expression that we all know, it takes a village. And with Waste No More, what they've been able to initiate is something more than just a physical solution to waste textiles in our environment. It has been able to create a circular business model that not only invites the community to participate in along with the making of this transformational textile, but it really is a reflection of what can be a community-made textile. And by community-made textile, I'm not just referring to the community of creative thinkers and makers that are involved in the physical making of this textile at Waste No More, but I'm also referring to the collective creative community where this can have impact and continue to grow through larger industry collaborations and partnerships. And it's through my conversation with Sigi and Abigail that we talk about the potentiality of where this needs to go and grow moving forward. Both Sigi and Abigail were extremely generous with their time, sharing their experiences into how Waste No More has evolved over the last few years since its inception, and where they've encountered challenges and how that's enabled them to continue to innovate and grow. And they were extremely generous with not only their time, but sharing their process and how it came to be. And they have not only innovated this transformational textile, but they are opening up the apparel industry into multiple industries. They are rethinking the traditional roles of materials, rerouting familiar supply chains into surprising new systems. And it is through this that they've managed to produce a cultural textile that combines art with invention and is bringing artists and partnerships together that's allowing for them to further expand upon what can be done when you look at things from a zero waste methodology. And it's through this that they are not only rethinking the traditional raw materials, but they are actually rerouting and familiarizing a new form of supply chain using an alternate system that allows for surprising and unexpected results to emerge. And it's because of this type of creative thinking and alternative approach to materials and processes that they're able to creatively problem solve and bring forth the necessary solutions that we do require when it comes to working with textile waste. But their work also emphasizes the valuable role that waste textiles serves not only as a creative material resource, but also as a tool for new developments in materials for the 21st century. And it's from this standpoint that I think it's time for me to introduce you to both my guests. Sigi Ahl is an artist and author based in New York City. She received a diploma in visual communication from Offenbach College of Applied Arts and a master's degree from Frankfurt Academy of Fine Arts. She's been a long-time collaborator with Eileen Fisher since the early days of the company. And as I mentioned earlier, she established the Eileen Fisher Take Back program back in 2009, which then went on to inspire the establishment of Design Work, which is an extension of this endeavor. Ahl has had solo exhibitions in the US and Germany, as well as written several illustrated children's books, one of which was nominated for a Children's Literature Award. And you can also find her paintings and graphic works in public collections throughout Germany. And my next guest, Abigail Erikson, began her career in the fashion industry over a decade ago after graduating with a degree in fashion design and business. Her early training at Marie Claire magazine, Theory, and Tibby made her realize the importance of sustainability in fashion and how it was sorely lacking. This observation led her to the project On Purpose, a corporate social responsibility initiative by Kate Spade and Company. Her time at Kate Spade was spent establishing a complex supply chain in rural Rwanda, and it's from here that she took this knowledge and experience to help scale sustainable fashion startups and small businesses. Her experience establishing complex supply chains spans many states and countries, and it was when Erikson joined Eileen Fisher, Waste No More, in 2018 as the administrative and project manager, that she was able to continue to expand upon her love for organizing, whether it's people or processes. She loves the creative problem solving that is involved in systems thinking. She believes that there is a solution for everything. It just takes a little creative problem solving and negotiation. Being a creative herself, she understands the fluidity of the creative process and how it cannot remain stagnant. So I ask you now to settle in and grab your favorite cup of tea and spend the next hour immersed in a conversation that captures the transformative qualities of this textile in this process and what this material innovation has the ability to do that is unlike any other.
Hi, I'm Abigail Erikson. I'm the project manager for Waste No More, and I'm calling in from my apartment in New York City.
I am Sigi Ahl. I'm the creative director of the project Waste No More. And I'm calling in from our so-called tiny factory, which is situated about 40 minutes up from Manhattan, right at the Hudson River, in a beautiful, very old Stanford white factory building from the 1880s.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both. It's such a pleasure to meet you finally. And I just want to say that, I know you have a busy schedule, so I do appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to speak with me today. It's important that I say that I first came across Waste No More probably around 2018. I think I first learned about that. And what I want to say is what you've established shifts the narrative around what is creatively and technically possible when it comes to transforming waste textiles in our environment. And it's not just that you've been able to shift that narrative, you've been able to not only allow for different forms of engagement that are meaningful, that allows for people to participate. So essentially building this lovely community that allows for the story, for that narrative, for people to equally participate in along with the amazing outcomes that you've clearly produced to date. And so I think just from that note, that we should start the conversation off by asking, what is Waste No More and what are you doing differently?
It has a lot to do with how it started and how this evolved into our current project. Because Eileen Fisher is a fashion designer company of 36 years or even longer, who has always handled design and fabric choices and everything as conscientiously and responsibly as she could possibly do on the status of knowledge throughout those 35 years. So at some point she realized that the textile industry is doing a lot of damage. And that's when she started taking back her customers' clothes. She started the Recycle program in 2009, basically taking back her customers' clothes. And it started really well. There was a concept store where the secondhand, the vintage Eileen Fisher clothing that customers brought back was resold again next to the main line, the new collections. Over the years, there were a lot of clothes brought back that were not good enough to be worn anymore, right? So the next step was, what do we do with it? Because it was clear that we would not give it to the, at that time, existing clothing recycle industry that would pack everything and send it to Africa for another use, to end up in their landfill and so on. So she financed basically exploration and experimentation. I have been with this since 2009 and trying to break our heads with what can we do. So we worked with artists, we worked with the classic ways that many young designers now do, sewing new clothes from the old ones. I came across needle felting by a private workshop that I made on a sheep's farm, where there was fresh roving virgin wool and hand needle felting. And I was so fascinated by this that I pursued, I thought, that I experimented with it. So, and we ended up with a felting machine, and even that was a risk because we never knew this was a larger investment, and one never knows what comes out of it. So it's really wonderful that Eileen Fisher actually was open to risk and make those investments on her own. And that's where we are. We're now using an industrial felting machine. And the difference here, I think that should be pointed out, is that we use this machine in a different way the industry is using it. We're using it as a design tool. And maybe I should just say so much because we're getting more into it later and I don't want to talk all the time.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But actually, it's a perfect segue to my next question because, in watching the evolution of Waste No More, I know that you've been extremely generous in sharing your methods and opening up, because these are very important conversations, transparency, all these words I could throw in here right now. But the fact that you are showcasing and wanting to educate around the methods and processes that you're using, that there's a different form of accessibility that doesn't necessarily happen when it comes to understanding the creative process, because material development isn't something that's often shared. And so I just wonder if you could explain for our audience what this process is. Like, how would you best describe the textile that you're creating out of these waste materials?
I think the simplest way I would describe it is a felt-like material. We often call it felted fabric, and I think it confuses people a little bit because they think of traditional felting, water and soap, and traditionally wool. So it is a felt-like material, but it is layers of Eileen Fisher garments that are needle punched together. The needles break down the fibers and rebind them together from the friction and the pressure. So that's like the very, very simple form. Once you see our team, I mean, the design process, and Sigi can absolutely speak to this, is very intuitive. And then there's really an unlimited amount of variables when operating the machine. And that all leads to the outcome of the fabric. But the simplest answer, I think, to your question would be a felt-like material that's created using needle punching.
And through this process, and I'm not sure who might be able to answer this, maybe Sigi, just in around through the material development and going through this process and also allowing for your team that's involved in the manufacturing of this cloth, like when it comes to material performance and deciding the outcomes that you've created, like what was that like for you? I can just imagine, being immersed in the process and then also deciding what you want to do with this.
The way we're using this technology is a little unusual, as I said. This technology is being used in the industry since a long time for creating service textiles and for the construction industry. Difference here is that we're using our clothes as they are. Like, we just deconstruct them. We turn them from three-dimensional objects, which clothes are, into their flat. We cut the seams and it becomes the raw material again, the source material. This all wouldn't work if Eileen Fisher had not from the beginning on used very good, high-quality fabrics, to 90% biological fibers, right? Wonderful silks, cashmeres, wools, linens, cottons, organic cottons now. And without this, I think this is provides the basis of how something good can come out of it. We're basically what has become unusable as clothing. It's still a precious material. Through experimentation, because we leave the clothing untouched, basically, right? It's the material, and we put them together. The needle felting actually created, like the way it works together with the material, created a new aesthetic that was astonishing to us. And while you could still, because working with recycled clothing is always patchwork, right? Because patchwork has a certain aesthetics that is known to everyone and recognizable. It is still from the method or from how we use it, patchwork, because we're using pieces of clothing and not yardage of fabrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fabrics. What this technology does to the clothing is just astonishing. That's how what we discovered, and we were so drawn by the aesthetic results that made us stick to it. And it wasn't easy. So it's not like you run those clothes through the machine and something great comes out. You want to make a fabric that is reliably a fabric and serves structurally and is resilient to its uses, to discover how the fabrics respond and how they respond in combination with color and construction of a fabric plays a role too. And each fiber has a certain property that also comes out in a different way. So, and then they bond together in different ways. So it took a lot of experimentation to work in targeted ways and create a structurally reliable fabric. So, and it is now 3 years since we devote our time to this entirely, and we're now actually we're still not making too many clothes because the felt is a little too. We're working on that. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
more time for that, but we're creating objects like home accessories and fashion accessories like bags and things where.
Correct.
Where we have put a lot of work in figuring out the development of resilient fabric.
And is there anything about the process that continues to surprise you in some way?
Oh, absolutely. Like we love doing this because while we can work a lot more targeted now because we have accumulated quite some knowledge and techniques and methods of creating fabric, there's still so many surprises, and there are also so many fibers that we have not yet explored entirely. It's totally exciting. Like this work is totally exciting. I think we all, our team all shares this passion and curiosity.
Fantastic. And I'm excited for you because as someone that's done a certain amount of material research, I get it. It's just, when you're immersed in process in that way, there's no other, you can't even articulate it sometimes, I find, from a creative standpoint. But I wonder, Abigail, if you can actually answer this next question. Have you been able to document or assess how much waste that you've been able to transform, and whether it's on a seasonal or a yearly level at this point? Is there anything you can share around that?
So I don't have exact numbers, but I can get them too. I don't have them off the top of my head. It's definitely something that we track, the amount of incoming garments versus the amount that can be resold versus the, amount that comes to our team as damaged inventory, and then what we then can turn into fabric. But I can say is right now, and especially with just with COVID and all the shutdown, and our business did come, halt for quite a few months. We do have more inventory coming in than what we are using. But I think the tricky thing that we're constantly trying to find the fine balance of is we are working with a finite amount of inventory. So while we may have a section of red merino wools, those did not just accumulate in 2 months. That could have taken 5 or 6 years to accumulate. So I think Sigi and the team are always we're always prioritizing our inventory based on our commissioned orders and projects for the company, because once you use up that inventory, we don't know how long it's going to be before that material comes in. As a company, Eileen Fisher uses lots of blacks and naturals. And so the colors are kind of, they're a premium because we don't get them as much. And so it's really this fine balance. I think we've adopted an inventory management system that we're using now to track our materials, but we're tracking everything because it's a lot, to manage. There's so many variables, but we're also just trying to see if there's any patterns. And I think in 2020, we can give you a number for that. It's a little skewed just because it was such business was so much less in 2020, but
of course. Unfortunately, but yes.
So we collected 134,000 garments about. We resold about 41,000. And then our team specifically, we transformed 5,000 garments in 2020. We usually transform, anywhere from 10 to 20. So that number was much lower in 2020. And then we donated 55,000 garments to nonprofits. So I know I just threw a lot of
wow. No, but that's
numbers at you. I think that also highlights the materials that we can't felt with. We don't want to just downcycle them. We really want to find, if it can't be with us, then who else could make use of it in a valuable way instead of just sending it to be shredded and becoming insulation. So we have a lot of teams that are really spend their time researching, looking at avenues, even if it's not suitable for us to felt with.
Fantastic. Well, I have this question. It's actually for both of you, but maybe Abigail, you can answer this first.
Sure.
Because so much of what you're doing is you are obviously both immersed in process all throughout. I know there's the organizational end of things. There's the creative immersion throughout this entire process. There's all these variables as well. But I wonder, given your respective roles, what is it about perhaps being immersed in process that allows for you to creatively problem solve and innovate?
That's a great question. I think what I found with this project, I think I struggled with this a little bit in the beginning. I've joined the project 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I struggled with a little bit is I had come from a corporate background and there was already systems and I had worked with startups. So I had that experience. But I think what I struggled with is this is so different. And I think what was different in the sense that no one in our company is doing this and no one in the industry is doing this. So whereas before, when I was working with small businesses and startups or even corporate, there was some sort of roadmap that you could, turn to people for advice or input. But I think for us, we can't do that. I think that in and of itself really ignites this kind of creative problem solving. I think something that I'm also finding is that we'll solve one problem and then another one will pop up. And so it's really just this chain effect. And so it's really, which I am actually really finding the joy in because it is a bit of a puzzle. I think what's really interesting too is there's still so much, uncertainty and there's so much possibility with this fabric, as Sigi was mentioning, that we're really just skimming of the surface with the potential of this, which is exciting, because we, we're a small team and there's only so much we can do. And there's so much we want to do. We have these crazy, exciting to-do lists of things that we just want to tackle and explore. So I don't know if I really answered your question, but
I definitely did.
Of all those things really kind of, forces you to come up with creative solutions through action and experimentation and not necessarily through conversation and others' experience.
Amazing. And Sigi, what about you? What is it about the being immersed in the process of working with these materials and working with the team in the factory? Like, what is it about working with waste materials and this whole process that allows for you to creatively innovate?
I want to build on what Abigail said because while everything we're doing here resulted from a problem to be solved, right? So what do we do now with all those beautiful clothes that cannot be worn anymore? So what we actually built here was something that out of necessity, again, a whole operation that not only consists of designing new fabric with a machine, but an operational cosmos actually that makes it possible to make those. So we needed to conceive of an inventory organization of all those waste, clothing waste that makes sense and serves the design and making process, right? That in itself is actually an own operation. So we created several operations in this whole like our own infrastructure. And since this is not existing, nobody does that out in the world. We couldn't learn from anyone. We really had to invent it as we go and experience what makes most sense to create a workflow and to become productive and financially viable as well. So of course you want to create something that makes sense also economically. And for that you need people who are ready for who can deal with chaos, who can form out of the chaos something that serves the workflow and the mission and where we want to get to. And that's wonderful. That's actually very satisfying to and gratifying to work when you see we're getting somewhere. I think it's also engaging everyone in a way that, like, if you discover like your ideal work, right, you become even better and like making it, refining it, and so on. So yeah, we can't look anywhere else. We have to invent this, and that's what we did.
I guess to kind of piggyback off that, I wonder, in the process of doing your material developments, was there a particular material or what was an existing garment that impacted the process in some way? Do you have an aha moment of working with a certain material that just impacted your approach to design?
Yeah, it is well known that wool is feltable, like since ages. People have always felted wool, and of course, that's a very good material to work with. We have found that other fibers also felt really well, and it's actually the biological fibers where there's rayon involved, which is also biological, but through a chemical
Yeah.
process. Rayons, certain fibers don't do that well. Abigail has mentioned them, that's what we donate to artists or other people who we work with, post-consumer textiles. The discovery that this is possible, that all those biological fibers actually have properties that make them feltable, and that was a great discovery. So yeah, and each of them actually has an own way of responding to that machine treatment, and we have not even explored it fully. So we have learned to now at this point to be more directed in the aesthetic results. So depending on the product, all the fabrics we do are for a specific product in mind. We're not just producing fabrics, and we can more and more target very much the desired design result.
Mm-hmm. So, because I know collaboration is a significant part of your research and development, are you able to share any sort of future collaborations or who potentially you may want to have a conversation with Waste No More with?
Design wise or industry wise, like in both ways. Yes, for example, when we've worked with architects and interior designers for particular projects and were commissioned, and we collaborated with them. So they have an idea, and if it doesn't work the way they think, because they realize we are so new, we can't really work in the ways designers and buyers have been working, because our resource material is not infinite.
Mm-hmm.
People used to be able to order 100 yards of one particular wallpaper, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we can't really serve that. We can look if we have that color for 100 and make 100 yards, but if we don't, that's where we need the designer or the architect to collaborate with us and to create a concept that makes it work. And we find there are people want this to work, and that's wonderful, because we all know this is for good. The purpose is good, so we want to make it work. So that's a collaboration, a very gratifying one, and that we have experienced. For the industry, it is really what we have here. We're creating a model for the industry, and so that this is possible, we need more industry partners, like brands that make high quality clothing, right? But we need more machines. We need a higher inventory. Like, our inventory works for us in a
Right.
small way, but it wouldn't work. Like, we need hundreds of thousands of garments to make this a very high efficient production. And so we need more brands. Like if we all got together, all those brands, and they created a collection system that would bring it all together and got more designers, more machines, more inventory specialists, and all of this could be translated into a bigger industrial scale, but it needs partners, and maybe we will find them in the future.
Well, there's no question, because I think there is such a desire for more regional textiles, for the more regional production of textiles. From the conversations I've had with different guests on this podcast and just different industry people I've spoken to, just there is, and not a result of, the pandemic, there has been this slowly edging towards different methods and different forms of cultural textiles. And to me, what you're doing is very indicative of that. So I can only imagine the scalability and the really interesting formations that can come from, as well as collaborations come from, the evolution of what you're doing. And so, I mean, I wonder, because of that, because of there's so much education that goes into what you're doing. That's clear. What kind of knowledge gaps, or do you think misinformation, do you think exists around working just with textile waste, but also with the process that you're working from within? Is there something that our audience should be made aware of?
I think one of the challenges we have is, as consumers, we've been, trained for the deal and the sale and the bargain. There is a shift, shift in consciousness, and just a shift in buyer habits is getting back really to value. Our stuff is handmade while we use a large machine. We have artisans, highly skilled artisans and designers standing at the machine with Sigi producing the fabric. We have highly skilled seamstresses sewing our finished goods, deconstructing the garments. I mean, there's so many hands. Even our sorter is trained so well that she can touch an Eileen Fisher garment and know what the fiber content is. So it's this really highly skilled team, but there's a lot of hands and people touching it, and there is a cost for that. And I do think the product that we are producing, you could not get the same one-of-a-kind artisanal effect if it was mass produced. So I think there is a huge education with our consumers of what actually goes into making this product, because I think the value of products has just been so minimized that, to see a felted pillow, a little art pillow for $100, while the Eileen Fisher customer understands that because she appreciates value, but the greater consumer market doesn't. And so I think there's a big education gap that needs to kind of be filled there. And we've really been working with our marketing team and our internal teams of how can we tell that story so people really understand what goes into this? Like, this is truly all made in our factory in Irvington. I mean, it's, as we say, like, there's a level of just unglamorousness that happens, and it's incredible work, but it's work, and it's time consuming. I think the other thing is, again, kind of is more internally and less consumer facing, is working with our internal teams, and Sigi really touched on this, is working with our buyers. Like, we aren't working in the same traditional ways. You don't just place an order and we produce it. So we are a supplier for the company or for architects and designer or interior designers, but it's not the traditional way. But I love that because it really touches on what you were saying about collaboration, is that it is more of a collaborative relationship. So it's not just me placing an order, here's my invoice, go ahead and produce. There's a ton of conversation that happens with us internally and with external clients about a lot of brainstorming is happening. This is what we want. This is the vision we're going for. Okay, we have to go back. We have to see what's possible. Sigi and the team have to really make some samples, look at our inventory. So there's a ton of back and forth. But I think what we found from the collaborations that we have done is that it is more fulfilling. There is a more level of fulfillment. It does force you to slow down a little bit. There is a thoughtfulness in it because we have to be. And then we're finding internally with our buyers that once you explain the why, I think people are more open to it. I think it is easier internally because it's more personal relationships versus customer facing. It's a lot more difficult. But I would say those are probably our two biggest challenges is really kind of confronting the whole structure of how we've been working and really changing. It's a whole new supply chain. It's a whole new way of being. But I think it's something, we're continually working on and refining and improving upon.
Great. Well, I mean, when I think about the education, I mean, it's one thing you're talking about the internal educational as well as industry. I was recently speaking to Estonian designer Reed Aus, who has pioneered the Upmade certification. And I mean, there's lots of talks around certification of certain, in her case, upcycled materials. And so I just wonder your thoughts around the necessity of having certification for industry and obviously for consumers to understand what's obviously essentially gone into the making of this textile. So I wonder if you have any thoughts upon that.
There are different types of certifications existing here in the US. Some of them are international. I don't know how it would apply to us. I know we are a B Corp, but I think that's also international. That's some sort of a certification about
That's right.
like what we do is a serious thing, a seriously good thing for the greater good. Yeah, I'm not sure how much more I could say. I'm not familiar with that particular
Yeah,
one.
no problem. I just was curious just because I know it's a new certification that's just meant to bring about a better understanding industry wise around companies that are using, methods that relate to upcycling in industrial processes.
Right. That I really like that. I wish there was more of that. Of course, that is important to develop and in ways that it reaches the consumer, because I do think consumers want to be part of the movement. They want to do the right thing. Everyone agrees, and it just needs to be more. That needs to be more education and information to consumers. We still have people saying, "Oh, I love what you do. I think it's so great, but your clothes are so expensive. I still buy my. I still don't want a T-shirt to be more than $15, right? For example." And there's a huge gap about like consumerism, giving up old habits of consumerism, and working with the industry where they can help make changes as a consumer. Some of it is already existing, but we need to still keep working. I mean, a lot of it is also the company telling the history, and we're not telling enough. The companies actually, along with Patagonia, has been very activistic and in the enacting changes in the textile industry, but has never made enough PR about it. There are companies who are much louder and have been doing not that much and for not that long than as we have. So, but that's just like who we are. No, but we're trying to tell our story better so that we are being heard and that we also get more industry partners. Like,
I can see that.
heard.
So I wonder, I mean, both of you, I would like you to answer this next question. If there was one takeaway that you would like our audience to know about Waste No More, what would that be?
It's more a matter of choice. I would have a million things to say, but which one of those? I don't know. I think what we do here is with passion and love, and a mission, we're all engaged seriously in this. I hope it shows in the work, and we can continue this and develop it further with the people who look at our work and love it, and we all, that's collaboration on a mission basis. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I think I would probably say that we're really showing the avenue or the possibility, showing what's possible with using secondhand materials, that it doesn't have to look secondhand. It doesn't have to be less than, like really confronting those perceptions I think that people have about what it means to be, recycled or upcycled. By no means is what we're doing the solution for all textile waste, but it is an avenue. And I think there's more possibilities that have yet to be discovered. I think Eileen and Sigi and this company have had the courage and the discipline to really commit to something for the long term, because I think that's the other reality, is that if you're looking for a quick marketing story campaign or corporate social responsibility initiative, this isn't it. Like, this is really long-term investment, but I do think it'll pay off. And so I think that sums it up.
Fantastic. And so outside of Eileen Fisher and Waste No More, who do you think is doing meaningful work that you would like to acknowledge? Is there anyone that you kind of just want to give a shout out to that's doing meaningful work?
Most recently is this initiative, like Lee Edelkoort founded the World Health Forum,
Yes.
sort of a counterbalance to the World Economic Forum. And they have conferences, international conferences, every 3 months. She founded this with the Business of Fashion, the publisher of Business of Fashion. I think it's a fantastic initiative because it's all about designers who work with the same mission. This is a new generation of designers. The young ones all look into, like, how can we do it differently and get away from destruction? And you see they all come together there in this World Hope Forum. And I think that's immensely productive and creative to have this platform and connect all these designers from internationally. This is globally, right? I think that's a very laudable initiative and idea.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I unfortunately missed the session where you were on a couple of weeks ago. It was the only one that I've missed to date, and I regret that. But I couldn't agree with you more. Everything I feel like Lee Edelkoort does is beyond inspiring, and she's had the finger on the pulse on everything. She's the voice of so many aspects of what is necessary and what needs to be said and experienced. And so I thank you for mentioning that, because I'm a huge fan. So
yes, so you can watch this. I think there's a recording of each of those events. You can watch it,
and I believe it's available on YouTube. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Channel. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So before I ask you to share a meaningful textile that I asked you both to prepare in preparation for our discussion today, I just wanted to know if there's anything that you want to share that's up and coming with Waste No More. I know so many things have been kind of on hiatus because of the pandemic, and I know that you're just getting probably back into the way of things again. But is there anything upcoming that you would like to share that you could share with our audience?
We have our summer collections coming out, which is exciting. Our Jolly Yellow Pillow, which is very fun. It's 30 pillows that are one of a kind, and they're very jolly and very necessary right now with everything we just wanted to, it's like chartreuse and yellows, and it's very beautiful, very vibrant, and we just needed that joy. That was one of our first projects coming back as a team, which was really just something fun. It'll be sold only on eileenfisher.com. It's a small limited edition collection, but that's really fun. And then a month later, we have another collection of handbags coming out in denim in June. So that's exciting. I don't know how much I can mention, but we are working on new developments that Sigi and Carmen, one of our designers, is working on. And I think that's really exciting because it's outside of our traditional home goods and fashion accessories. So we're really exploring other categories that we've been wanting to do for a while, but have kind of finally found a little bit of space to be able to do that. So I think that's fun to be able to expand into other product categories and to really kind of move that forward.
Oh, that's exciting. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
And actually, Sigi, I have one question that just popped into my mind, because I was listening to you earlier and you were talking about, how you got introduced to needle felting and that whole process. And I just wonder if this is something that I've been contemplating for some time, is that when we take industrial processes, like in the case of industrial needle felting, that's been used for a very specific process. But a lot of these industrial processes that have been developed since the Industrial Revolution, they've been designed for an intended use, but there hasn't been the same kind of joy and pleasure that's been implied or applied through the use of some of these industrial processes. And I see that obviously through what you've done in the team, and how, there is this creative interpretation that's allowed to come through the end result. So I just wonder if how you feel about the relationship to be able to take an industrial process and be able to play with it. We understand that it is producing an end product, an outcome that, can be unexpected at times. But at the same time, you're not only, again, shifting the narrative of these materials, but also the narrative of these tools. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
That's actually a good question. I think that we should definitely touch deeper into it. We only touch the surface. This is indeed what we are doing here, artisanal work. It is not like big machinery industry and thousands of yards produced within a day. While we are medium-sized, we can produce a medium-sized level volume, right?
Yes.
But it's still like if you picture a hand weaver on a loom or a knitter on a knitting machine, right? That is artisanal, and this one is also artisanal. We can make a fabric. Each fabric is being laid out by hand, by a designing mind, and it needs to be designed while it is being built, because you work with all those pieces of colors. It needs a design concept when you start. It needs a process of how to build the fabric for structural reasons, and the structural parts are also the designing parts. It's all one thing, right? But a person needs to be there and build this, and it's a designing mind. So that's a handmade fabric. It's an artisanal fabric. It has its price. It can never be cheap. I think nothing can be cheap because human labor is precious, and we should get away from thinking everything is cheap, because it dismisses human labor.
Yeah, because I can see although I've yet to see it in the flesh, but the images that I've seen, the plethora of images I've seen, is that it ultimately, I feel like it captures the presence of the maker in that process. So I guess that's really what I was trying to articulate a little bit earlier. So I apologize, it didn't come through as clearly, but it's just something I think about, in relationship to tools and processes I've come to know. So thank you for that. Thank you. So this is the part of the episode where I ask each guest to share a meaningful textile or garment. And I developed this segment after years of actually being a professor in textiles. And I found that a lot of students, it's a really vulnerable space to kind of introduce yourself constantly all the time. So I have them do it through a meaningful textile or garment. And it's an amazing tool for building relationships and collaborations and lifelong friendships. And so I just wonder, it doesn't matter who starts first, but I just wonder what you'd like to share as far as your meaningful textile or garment.
My textile or garment, meaningful garment, is a broad category, but it's khadi. I was introduced to khadi fabric a few years ago, or maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. But I was introduced to it at a time when I was leaving big fashion, a big company, lots of waste, and it really was feeling a little disconnected. And I took a trip to India as part of my work of consulting and working with small businesses. And I had felt the khadi, and it was like, oh, this is fine. It doesn't have the nicest hand feel. It's a nice fabric, but the khadi I was introduced to, it was very simple. And it was just like, this is nice. It should be a couple dollars of yarn. Again, my own conditioning. But then I was able to go to a village and see how it was made. And it's the thoughtfulness that went into every step, stretching the yarns, hand spinning the yarns, the hand weaving. I mean, it was anything but simple. And it was so grounding to just be there and to feel that textile and to work with that textile. And I feel like it really kind of realigned me with my purpose, and it really set the stage for me to join the Waste No More team, because I feel like so much of the work that we do is so mirrors the similarities of khadi, where there's so many steps and there's so many hands working with the material, and it's methodical and it requires discipline, but there's a playfulness, and you can see the weaver or the artisan in the material, similar to our work, which is what you just mentioned. And so in the slubs of the fabric where it's not so perfect, and I loved the imperfections of it. And I think khadi really allowed me to embrace those imperfections again. And it's traditionally in cotton, as may know. Some we used to weave in silk and wool, and then the history of it and with Gandhi, and I won't go into those details, but it's really just this fascinating fabric, and it doesn't look like that on the surface. So that's my significant material or important material.
That's beautiful, and I can imagine how much of the impact, how powerful, and the insights that you created as a result of that.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Sigi, what is your memorable textile?
Well, I've chosen a wall work called Heat Map. What it actually is, it's a painting. It's a painting with old clothes rather than with brush and acrylics or oil paint, which is my background. Actually, I come from painting, and I use paint with brush and acrylics and oil paint. And without ever having planned, I realized this technology and the clothes lend themselves to create fantastic paintings, which we call wall works, because they are actually like a middle thing between an object and a painting. A painting is flat and immaterial. Those are material. The textile, like textile wall works. And we, in fact, also sell them as artworks. We have made exhibitions. And we also, the first time we went out to the public was Milan 2018, in this railway tunnel, where we showed our wall works. They are the most capable billboards to be noticed and demonstrate people the astonishing aesthetics of what can be done with old clothes and this technology, right? So had we shown pillows or bags, it would not have been so noticeable. So those paintings or wall works are very important. And we've done actually some public spaces with wall works, like hangings. And yes, and I've chosen Heat Map because it shows like how you can paint with clothes. It's an abstract color space, and if you look more into the painting, you may discover remnants of, you may recognize like that the shapes in there are created by flat pieces of clothing, but you won't notice right away. It's more like these become abstract shapes and an abstract color space with transparency and movement in there, and I'm very much fascinated by that. And so are people who we've shown it to, and it's wonderful to see that astonishing visual beauty is being shared. To appreciate it.
Yes, no, I mean, from the images that I've seen, I mean, they're completely captivating and inspirational. So I'm really grateful that you've shared that with me today, and continuing to explore the use of old clothes through this painterly manner, because it really does allow for, again, to shift that narrative. Even as I understand the traditions of painting, for example, it shifts that narrative completely. So thank you so much for sharing that. And so, yes, I mean, this concludes our conversation, but I just want to thank you so much for taking the time again to speak with me. I'm hoping that when the world opens up again, that I have the ability to come and visit the facilities once that again once things open up again. And if there's any opportunity of anything happening in London, please let me know. So again, thank you so very much. Enjoy the rest of your day on the East Coast, and I look forward to staying connected and speaking again soon.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much. And it was great fun to be here.
Wonderful.
Likewise, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of The Material Revolution. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, or perhaps you may want to suggest a topic, material innovation, or an expert that you would like to hear on an upcoming episode, please reach out to us via email at info@thematerialrevolution.com, or you can contact us through any of our social media channels. If you haven't done so already and have enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe to the show via Apple Podcasts or from any platform that you're choosing to listen to this from. We would appreciate it if you could rate, review, and help us spread the word by sharing this podcast with friends. And if you would like to support this podcast further, consider visiting our Patreon page and make a pledge. You can do this by accessing the link that's located in the episode notes of this podcast, or you can visit our website or any of our social media channels where we will have that link made available. Well, that concludes our show for today. We hope that you left this episode feeling more curious about what can be done with textiles. Music for this podcast is provided by Interior Design, composed by Rob Mathrew. If you dig it and you want to hear more, please visit the link included in the show notes or visit our website for more information about his work. You can also find images from today's episode located on our website, www.thematerialrevolution.com, and other show highlights are available on our Instagram, Facebook page, and YouTube channel.